this point in the Easter season, we find ourselves invited to sit at the table of Jesus on the night of the Last Supper. Certainly that happens every time we gather for Mass, for the Eucharist. We are at the table with Jesus. And he feeds us, and he speaks to us. But in another way, we begin to read from the Last Supper discourse in the Gospel of John. That'll take us through most of the end of the Easter season. Some very familiar passages. It's an interesting fact that the Gospel of John, which has 21 chapters in it, has 5 chapters dedicated to this one dinner conversation and then Jesus' prayer for his disciples. That says something about how important this message was. And the message comes down to this. It's a reminder, a confirmation of just how much he loves them. And he speaks a lot about friendship, about their friendship. He calls them friends, and he calls on them to love one another. It begins with the washing of the feet, and with that line, Jesus had always loved those who were his own in the world. And when the time came, he would show them the depth of his love. And now, on the night before he dies, he speaks of the depth of his love, and he sends them as his witnesses. You know, if I could make a suggestion, why don't we all take a little time in these next weeks to read through these chapters of the Gospel of John. John chapter 13 through 17. Maybe read it in small pieces. Sometimes we complain it's somewhat repetitive, and sometimes it seems to be a little convoluted. But take it in small bites and just read Jesus' words. Because what he says to his disciples at the table that night, he says to you and me today. He talks about how much he loves us. He reminds them of the hard time that they will experience in the coming days. He reminds us that he knows our struggles and our burdens. He assures them of his presence, and he assures us of his presence, of his strength, of his help. And he sends them forth. Amen, amen, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. Those apostles at the table heard it, and when they were filled with the Spirit, they went out as his witnesses. But very soon after, new apostles came along, like Paul and his companions, and we hear about their now bold preaching in the synagogues, proclaiming Jesus risen from the dead, showing people then and showing us now that the Lord is alive, that he loves us, that he walks with us, that he calls us his friends, and he calls on us to love one another.